Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Welcome to our bonus books episode for November. This month, our bonus books episode is dedicated to the Book of Witching, which is by C.J. Cooke. CJ is a poet, novelist and academic based in Glasgow. She was born in Belfast and wrote her first book aged 7. CJ has a PhD in literature from Queen's University, Belfast, and is currently reader in creative writing at the University of Glasgow, where she researches creative writing interventions for mental health. Her international best-selling 2021 novel, The Lighthouse Witches, was nominated for an Edgar Award and an ITW Thriller Award. It is also set to be a major TV series produced by Studio Canal and the Picture Company. Her 2022 novel, The Ghost Woods, was a Waterstones Scottish Book of the Month, and her 2023 novel, A Haunting in the Arctic, was longlisted for the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize. Her work has also been published in 23 languages, which is insane, and her latest novel, The Book of Witching, was published last month by HarperCollins, and here to chat all about it, welcome, Carolyn, to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. You are to be blamed for the late night that I had last night because I could not put this book down. I didn't want to go to sleep until it was finished with. This is 1,000% one of my top reads of this year. I absolutely loved it. But before we get into this book, because there's a lot to be said about it, I want to ask what you're currently reading.
So I am currently reading Meet Me at the Surface by Jody Matthews. So I got a lovely copy of that, and it's superb. It's right up my street. So yeah.
Wonderful. I've also been recommended that by my friend. So I feel
Good
like
stuff.
two people have now said to me in quick succession that I need to read it. So it's getting added
Yeah.
to my TBR. But let's get into your book. Could you tell the listeners a bit about the Book of Witching?
Yes, The Book of Witching is a dual timeline work of Gothic fiction, and it is set partially in 1594, and that story explores the real life witch trial of Alison Balfour, the first woman out of 72 to be executed on charges of witchcraft in Orkney. And the contemporary narrative explores a woman who receives a call to say that her teenage daughter has been severely injured in a terrible fire in Orkney while she was exploring with a friend and her boyfriend, who is dead and her friend is missing. And linking these two stories is a very evil book, a supernatural book that belongs to all timelines.
That book had me so on edge.
Good.
I don't want to give too many spoilers. I want to be really careful. But the fact that this book is just a book that you cannot get rid of is absolutely terrifying.
Yes, an evil book that you can't get rid of. It's not something you want on your bookshelves, no.
No, no, not at all. Probably wasn't the best for me to read this late at night, but I did anyway. It's such an addictive read, and I absolutely loved it. And I know that your work is often described as like gothic and feminist. Are those the kind of books that you're drawn to reading, or is that just something that you're interested in writing
Yeah.
about? I was wondering if your tastes were kind of aligned.
Yeah, I mean I do read very widely, and I will read anything, and I teach creative writing as well. So, I think I have to read widely, but yeah, I do enjoy books that are feminist, and I do enjoy books that are gothic. So yeah, I think that's always been my sort of inclination and where my writing falls naturally. But I think there was a while when, it seemed that wasn't really wanted, and especially when you're trying to establish yourself,
Hmm.
you have to try out what people are actually going to read or publish.
Hmm.
But with The Nesting, I did go slightly weird. That was a book that was published in 2020, and I submitted a draft to my publisher at the time, who was really into it and really wanted me to go deeper into the folkloric elements of
Hmm.
that book. So she sort of encouraged me to lean more heavily into elements that come very natural to me. So that was nice to have that sort of permission and confidence build. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
that's my natural sort of writing, I don't know, niche.
I love that. But this book has only been out in the world for about a couple of weeks now, and
Yeah.
the reception to it has been really, really good. I've been seeing your book
Great.
everywhere.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, honestly. So I feel like how does it feel on your end?
Well, it's definitely a lovely thing to publish something that is well received.
Yeah, I can imagine.
No, it's been lovely, and yeah, it's just been really just wonderful to see the book, be so well received and a relief really because you don't know sometimes you
Mhm.
just don't know. uh, It can the writing process sort of can take its own shape
Yeah.
and I've had an experience where like actually I was just talking about the nesting. I suppose the nesting was published during the pandemic, but I loved writing that book and then it didn't do marvelous. I mean, Stephen King tweeted about it the other day, so that was really nice.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
Completely out of the blue, just mentioned the nesting on Twitter, so that was incredible. But yeah, it didn't get the reception that this book has. So you
It's
just don't.
so funny, isn't it? Like, you just
Yeah,
don't know what is going to appeal to people at what time because,
yeah.
like you've just said, like it might have not felt like it had a great reception at the time, but now Stephen King is reading it, so it's like you just
No.
can't, you just never know what to expect, do you?
No, you don't. I mean, it was published during the pandemic, so I know that
Yeah.
that sort of affected people. But yeah, no, it's really good, and I really love writing about witch trials. So I'm
Yes.
writing about the book that I've nearly finished, that's being published next October, is about a real life witch trial in the 1400s.
Oh my gosh.
So
So
yeah, really,
exciting.
really exciting. I love doing the research for it and trying to bring these stories to life that you sort of come across and think, wow, we sort of need to know more about this. So
Absolutely. It's such a fascinating subject, and I really want to read more about them now that I've read this book. How did you first come across this specific trial?
I was researching the Lighthouse Witches in 2019 and I came across a number of different trials. I mean, and they're all really grim, really horrific and anger making. Like you
Hmm.
get angry when you hear about these stories. But the story of Alison Balfour really struck me because it involves her children.
Yeah.
And I've never read a trial quite like this one, actually, in terms of how, horrifying it is to realize that they not only tortured her, but her whole family.
Yeah.
They were really determined to make her confess. And it's so unfair. I mean, it's beyond anything. It's just no one's going to withstand that. It doesn't matter how innocent you are, they're going to get their confession. And they
Hmm.
were really hell bent. Hers was a very unusual trial as well. They really wanted to pin this attempted murder on her rather than the Earl's brother, who, basically was the one who attempted to murder the Earl. So they wanted a scapegoat, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's so unfair and so horrifying that I just thought, we need to bring her story to life. So it stayed with me, that story. So I wrote about it for this book, obviously.
But from your research, where do you think the sort of fear of witches first kind of stemmed from? Because it does feel quite like gendered, and it does feel like it's. I mean, I don't know because obviously I've not done the research. So from your perspective, like where do you think
Yeah.
this fear comes from?
Well, the word witch didn't always mean women, and certainly I think in Iceland, it was all men that were put on trial because men were the healers, men were the ones who held the power and so on. But, the book I'm currently writing explores the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of All Witches, which is a witch hunting manual from the 1400s written by a Dominican monk who just went to town on his misogyny. Really, these ancient beliefs about women being, because Aristotle said women are defective men. They kind of, they almost got to be men and then they didn't. And so our bodies are inferior and our minds are inferior and all this horrible
Mm,
misogynistic stuff. And then you have this monk who puts down on paper all this misogynistic, horror, this belief system lesson that he shared with everybody about how women are sort of inherently or intrinsically witches, that, you know, that we have this natural inclination towards evil and such awful hatred. So from that point, from that book was a bestseller in the 1400s, and I think it influenced many, many witch trials
Hmm.
because you do see this much higher proportion of women being accused and brought to trial, and they weren't allowed to speak either at their own trials. So there's a lot of unfairness, and
Hmm.
belief systems around torture, for instance, you know, was permitted because it was seen that the devil couldn't inhabit or possess a body that was in pain. So it was a way of getting to the truth. But it's interesting because Malleus Maleficarum is the gendered Latin root. Maleficarum is female plural, but if he had used Maleficorum, that's the male root, but also the neutral. It could refer to both sexes, but he specifically used the feminine plural root, which makes very clear to anyone who, if you don't even read the book, you know from the title that he's insinuating that, you know, women are witches. So I think it comes from then. But you know, he was not the only one to hold misogynistic views.
Yeah, it's so unsettling to even think about. And, you know, there's so many moments in this book that just fills you with absolute rage
Yeah.
because you're just like, why is this woman not being listened to? Like, it's the lengths that they go to get her to confess are just so astonishing and upsetting. What
Yeah.
is it like for you writing those things? Because it must be like, how do you kind of protect yourself when you're writing that?
I think, you know, you always have to create a safe space
Hmm.
yourself, like when you're writing anything really, because
Yeah,
I
definitely.
feel the self shows up in the page always. So, you know, you can actually be writing something that would seem to a reader to be quite innocuous, but actually for you it's triggering
Hmm.
or it's mining something that was traumatic at the time. So always there needs to be care taken with writing, and just, yeah, lots of rest built in to sort of step away from it. I think for me though, what was useful was actually having as much research to do as I did with this book. I really was determined to make sure I wrote about a real person with
Yeah.
the amount of respect and, you know, duty of care really that requires. And so I dove very deep into the, you know, the context of Orkney at the time, the
Hmm.
socio-political context, to understand what was at play and why she made the choices that she made. Because, you know, I don't want to give spoilers, but her family was tortured, and so, but she was really strong. She held out until, you know, quite a ways in, and I had to understand what was at stake for her.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was able to put some pieces together and think, okay, so the whole of Orkney is actually being starved and mistreated by this Earl. So she would have felt a responsibility, I think, towards her community.
Hmm.
But I didn't want to just fabricate details. I wanted to make sure I was really checking the source books and making sure that I was being as true as I could be.
Do you think that's why you wanted to use her real name in the novel? Because you wanted to kind of protect her actual story, or yeah, was it the reasons that you just said?
Yeah, I initially was quite nervous about writing about a real person. I just thought, you know, I don't know if I can do her justice, and
Hmm.
I just take that so seriously. So I was going to kind of fictionalize it, and then I thought, no, I've done enough research that I feel confident. So once I reached a level, I thought, no, I think I can do this. And actually, we don't have the trial records for her trial. I don't know actually if a scribe was employed to take down the sort of annotate the details of the trial. We have some trial records from Orkney, but they weren't interested in capturing women's words. They weren't interested in capturing their lives or who they were. And we only know about Alison's story because of her retraction. So
Yes.
someone did write down her retraction. And that's super interesting
Mm.
because why would they do that? Even if they did write down the rest of the trial proceedings and we just have lost them. Even if they did take those down, the real objective is very clearly that they wanted to put the blame for the Earl's attempted murder on her. So if they go to the trouble of doing whatever it takes to get her confession, why take down her retraction where she says, actually, guys, I don't confess. And she go, you know, it's right before she's put to death. And as she says, you tortured me, you tortured my husband, and she actually recounts the trial and says, and I did not do this. And there we go. But it suggests that someone was sympathetic to her cause, that
Absolutely.
it kind of lost control of the trial. And that sort of idea really, I think, gave me permission to tell her story and to try and see what I could to do with that whole process, and the fact that there might have been people who had, real sympathy for her but weren't in a position to save her.
It's so fascinating, and it's amazing that that was the one thing that we have in history about her trial is that
Yeah,
retraction. I think it's fascinating that somebody did that.
I know.
And I want to talk a little bit about, obviously we've touched on your research, but with the book being set between Orkney and Glasgow, and I think you live in Glasgow, is that right?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but did you get to travel much during the research process?
Yeah, I did go to Orkney. I went for a week and I wanted to just, to see what it was like. And I've always been fascinated by Orkney, and I'd love to go to Shetland as well. I'm so fascinated by island communities.
Mm.
I think it's so interesting. And I didn't get to see anywhere near as much of Orkney as I would like to, because there are loads of islands up there. But what I did see was so beautiful. I traveled in August and it was gorgeous weather. The scenery was incredible. Nothing like the kind of windswept isles that I depict. But yeah, and I went to the archives there and did a lot of archival research, and I visited St. Magnus Cathedral, which I had read was where the trial took place. So I was
Mhm.
really intrigued and excited to go to the cathedral for that reason. And also the St. Magnus Cathedral is built on the bones of St. Magnus are actually in the cathedral, like the walls of the cathedral. It's
Oh
really
my
quite
gosh.
gothic. I know, but I did learn that those history books that say that that's where the witch trials were held are wrong. That's not where the witch trials were held. They likely would have been the witches would have been kept in a toll booth, and we don't know where the trial might have been upstairs from the toll booth. So it's not always the case that the secondary sources, however old they are correct.
That's so exciting though that you got to visit those places. It sounds like a
Great.
really, I don't want to say fun research process because it's obviously a very dark subject matter, but it sounds like it was a really fascinating trip, and obviously this book has come
Yeah.
out of it. So
No, it was fascinating. And actually I think what really, made a difference for me was, feeling like I could play a small part in shedding a light on her story. That was to me was really exciting
Mhm.
because, I felt deep empathy, but also the person who wrote down her words.
Yeah.
And that's why we know about her. I thought, yeah, I want to tell people about this because it was a huge injustice to this person. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter how long ago it was. She was just an ordinary person, and they just decided to pin the blame on her and really, do terrible things to her family as well.
Yeah, it's awful. Your book is set between 1594 and 2024. And when I
Yeah.
told my friend this the other day, she was like, "Wait, what?" Like she thought that I meant you tracked all that time, and I was like, "No, it jumps between the two timelines." So I have to be very clear about that to the listeners because I don't want to confuse anyone. But you do jump between these two timelines, and I was really curious what it was like to write in such vastly different timelines because it felt very seamless to me as a reader, but I imagine that might not have been the case writing it.
It wasn't too bad. I think because I wrote three timelines in The Lighthouse Witches, and I
Mhm.
remember that was really challenging. Like I kind of set it as a creative challenge for myself,
Why? Why
thinking
would you do that to
I
yourself?
know, honestly, and I honestly hated myself and the book for a good year. I just thought, what on earth have I done? But I think it did give me some skills in being able to do those two things, to write different
Yeah.
timelines. And I'm really fascinated by the dialogue between history and the present moment because I do think history is organic. I do think that it's not fixed, that actually, when we look back, we see more similarities than we do differences. At least that's how it's been for me. When I
Mhm.
started researching the witch trials, I did approach it with a sense of the historical other, that I'm looking into the deep, dark, distant past and things will all be different and people were different. But instead, I just thought, gosh, this feels very very contemporary.
Yeah.
There's a lot about it that feels like we could be sort of reading it now. And even just like for my current book, looking at the Malleus Maleficarum in translation, obviously, because it was written in Latin. But looking at reading that, I just was put in mind of Andrew Tate and these kind of
Yeah.
misogynistic kind of things that you see in social media all over the place. It felt dangerously contemporary.
Mm.
So that's one of the motivations for me for having two different timelines.
It's so funny, isn't it? That like, I mean, because when I was reading the 1594 sections, I often worry with historical fiction that I'm going to feel really separate from the
Yeah,
characters, but I actually didn't at all. I felt like I really knew Alison and knew her family, and yeah, it did feel very contemporary in a sense. And it's just so funny
yeah,
that actually like so much can change, but actually a lot of
yeah.
things stay the same as well.
Oh yeah, I marvel at it. I just
Yeah,
think, wow, it's really astonishing how, when you look back at history, people are just people
yeah,
and exactly the same as they are now. The same kind of family dynamics
yeah,
exist. I'm really obsessed with medieval history at the minute. I think from doing the research for this
yeah.
book, I've gone back further and I'm kind of obsessed because I thought medieval history was all like, it was just kings and knights and battles, and actually it's not. It's all dysfunctional families.
We
I
love a
love,
dysfunctional family
oh,
story.
it's so funny. It's just so interesting. There may not be TikTok and the internet, etc., but they
Yeah.
definitely have their own kind of social media. They have the same kind of grievances that we
Yeah.
have, and it's fascinating to read.
And speaking of dysfunctional families, because it is my favorite topic, what is my favorite topic around that is mother-daughter dynamics, because I
Yeah.
think it's such a fascinating topic, and I loved the way that you wrote mother-daughter dynamics in this book. I think you write this bond in such a special way, but I was curious why you felt this was such a significant bond in the context of this story.
Well, I suppose I started by the reason that I was so drawn to Alison's story was because her children were involved in the trial.
Yeah.
And I really thought, that's my connection to the story. You just think of your own children and something that really continues to literally amaze me about motherhood is that you just have this part of you that would do anything for your kids, no matter how much they annoy you or, I've got teenagers and they're all very teenagery, but you would literally give your life for them.
Hmm.
There is nothing that you would not do if it came to protecting them. And I just find that interesting. I
Yeah.
really just think that's remarkable because I haven't had to do anything to create that bond. It's just there.
Mm.
And, it's not even to do with, yeah, how good I think they are as people. It's just that bond is in me.
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested in exploring that. And I do find that this moment of like being a mother and having teenagers is vastly different from when they were babies,
Mm.
vastly different from when they were toddlers. And you're suddenly raising adults.
Yeah.
And so in the story, Clem is parenting Erin, who also has her own baby.
Yeah.
It's just yeah, I'm really interested in the tethers between people in general. I'm so
Hmm.
interested in relationships and dysfunctional
Oh
families.
yeah.
But the mother-daughter bond, I think, is really quite interesting and unique. And there's something also about, looking back at the past of women's rights and thinking, gosh, I thought we'd be further on than we are.
Yeah.
And you want better for your kids in that sense, but
Mm.
it's still there's still a lot to be achieved.
Yeah, I think it's oh God, I could talk about this all day. Yeah, it is so fascinating. I think specifically like you said, and the mother-daughter bond is so unique, and there is
Yeah,
so much that mothers pass on to their daughters, and it's just like this kind of never-ending cycle. I'm really specifically interested in like body image in the sense of mother-daughter relationships. But I'm not
yeah.
going to get into my niche my niche interest now. But
Yeah,
I did also think that the way that you wrote young people in this book was really great because you explore cults and how young people can get kind of drawn in online, but I think not just specifically young people, but how easily anybody can be drawn in by those things online. And I do want to
Yeah.
ask about that. But I think the way that you write young people in this book isn't in this patronizing way of like, oh, look at young people being online and making these stupid mistakes. It's like you don't kind of patronize anybody and you don't kind of like laugh at their naivety. You just kind of acknowledge it, but you're like, well, this can actually happen to anybody. Why do you think you write young people in that way? Like, are you conscious of the fact that you're not trying to be patronizing, or do you think it's just quite natural?
Well, I'm, as I said, surrounded by teenagers at the minute, and but as a writer, I actually really love the language
Mm.
that I just find it so interesting how they use language. Like, that my 14, I was going out for a book event the other day, and my 14-year-old said that I was giving cottagecore dark academia. I was like, oh, okay.
I love that so much.
I know, and it's just so funny. I find it hilarious. Some of the things they come out with, I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, that is brilliant. I was teaching I'm teaching undergrads at the minute. Usually I teach postgrads in my job, but I was teaching undergrads the other day and we were reading a story and someone said, oh, this is a situationship. And I said, a what? A situationship. What is a situationship? So I was like, oh, I love this.
It's so funny.
I know it really is. I actually do love it. I love language and I love the way that these new terms have like
Yeah.
come into being. So I'm always picking up different things from what they say. And I'm just forced to watch TikTok. Uh, I'm literally have no say. They'll just bring like th their phones and show
Yeah.
me stuff on
Watch
TikTok.
this.
And actually, it's really funny sometimes
Yeah.
the things that they show me. But also, my son, he's super into physics. He's doing his hires, his Scottish hires, and he comes out occasionally with these amazing facts. I mean, I didn't do A-level science, but I did GCSE science, and I just feel like I have erased all memory of physics from my knowledge because he'll come out with stuff that I'm like, how on earth do you know this at the age of 16? And he'll say TikTok. He
Yeah.
heard it on TikTok. And I'm like, maybe this isn't so bad.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's actually crazy. I am coming up to 30 in a couple of months, and I've got three younger sisters. And I still kind of, I don't know if you ever feel like old. I still feel like, no, I can't possibly be an adult now. And it's like, no, you're coming up to 30 until my sisters will come out with something and they'll come out with like a phrase. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like my sister says, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna swear, but like the phrase that they use is like serving cunt, and it means that
Yes,
like you're like I don't know, like I don't know how
I
to
know.
describe it, but when I
I
first
know.
heard it, I was like, what do you mean? That's so rude. And they were like, no, it's a good thing.
I
What do you
know. I
mean? It's a
know.
good thing.
I know it's hilarious. And my kids swear too, and I tell them off all the time. I'm like, you shouldn't say that, and they just don't listen. Do not listen. So yeah, it is really fascinating. They
So
all think I
funny.
was raised in the dark ages because
It feels
I
like it sometimes.
well, it does honestly, because we didn't have we had no TV, no
Yeah.
internet, no landline, no nothing, and they just cannot get their head around the fact that I grew up without like TikTok or Netflix. So completely different generations. So
God, it's
funny.
so funny. I did say I wanted to ask you about cults as well while we're talking about
Yeah.
being online. What interested you in writing about cults and how easily people can kind of get sucked into these things?
Yeah. So I was raised in a really quite a toxic religious setting, both in terms of what was going on in Northern Ireland, but just in my own family. It was a very high, I'll be polite and say it was a high demand religion. But suffice it to say, it has left me with a lifelong interest in cults and how you can yeah, be really in this high control situation and not kind of know it because it becomes so normalized over a very gradual period of
Mhm.
time. And I think it has just left me with this super interest in, because a lot of the people I knew in that environment and who are still members of that environment, were very nice people and educated people often. And it made me really question, well, what draws people in? Why do they want to be there, and have to act in very bizarre ways
Hmm.
sometimes, and there's a huge us and them mentality,
Yeah.
all of that. So it's yeah, I don't for one second think that it's just people who are, I don't know, I wouldn't be patronizing to people who get drawn in. I think there's many ways that you can end up in a situation that until you're sort of almost too late that you're like, yeah, wow, okay, this is maybe not right. So
Mm.
yeah, I think I was writing into that experience from my past and trying to understand it. But I did also research other kinds of cults. I listened to some podcasts and individuals who shared their stories about
Hmm.
not realizing
Yeah.
what they were getting into, and giving, when they reflect on how much time and money and all of these things that they willingly gave to this organization,
Hmm.
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It is terrifying, and I think it's so funny because we see, cults in horror films, or there's kind of a lot of like pop culture references or whatever,
Yeah.
and it's like this very exaggerated version of it. And yes,
Yeah.
of course those things exist, but actually like some cults aren't as exaggerated as that, and it's actually
Yeah.
something a bit more insidious, and it really fascinates me.
It's like domestic violence, isn't it? It's
Hmm.
not always the man who, or woman, the individual who appears on the outside to be that kind of
Yeah.
abuser. It's often the nice people, the
Hmm.
people, that maybe seemed absolutely lovely, that were doing these terrible things behind closed doors. So it's really about, yeah, looking deeper at those stereotypes and understanding what can happen to an individual.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. Before I finish off with my request for a recommendation, I do want to say that your book has this really cinematic feel to it.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I I read that you've written about film, and you also used to lecture in film studies. I think
Yeah,
that's right.
that's
Do
right.
you think that your kind of study of film has impacted the way you write?
Oh yes, yeah. I really wanted to go to film school actually when I was younger. That was my dream, but alas, I grew up in a council estate and had no funds for that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, I think that has always stayed with me, and so
Mm.
my books are sort of my mini films, if you like.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
it's just how I write, how I kind of experience the story myself, which
Mm.
is very visual. So, but that's a nice compliment. Thank
No,
you.
it absolutely comes across in that way. And also, I'm working class actor, so I think it's just incredible as well to see somebody that's come from, a working class background, council estate, and to see the career that you've had. I think it's really inspiring.
Oh,
So I am going to be that annoying person and ask if you've got any advice for any young writers that might be from similar backgrounds that are listening to this.
yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Oh,
It's a lot of pressure, sorry.
no, not at all, because I'm really passionate about it. I think you can. For me, especially, there was nothing at all good about being from a council estate. There was
Mm.
violence there, in my home. There was a lot of despair and a sense of entrapment. So it wasn't
Yeah.
very nice. And I definitely wanted to get out as
Mm.
much as I could. So I just worked super hard.
Hmm.
And I actually think I think if you do work hard, you will get out. Work
Yeah.
smart, you will get out. Joe Malone, I was reading about Joe Malone, the perfumer.
Yes, yeah.
Perfume. Yeah, and I was very surprised to read the other day that she grew up in very similar circumstances
I
to
didn't
me.
know that.
Yeah, and she just grafted, and I think, God, that's remarkable. I love those stories because
Yeah.
I had a working knowledge of the inside of a dole office at the age of 7. I
Mm.
knew what that place looked like, and it was not, it was, job centers aren't great places, but the dole office it was a literal prison. You had this turnstile, horrible, like it was just metal, and there was always people crying, and my mum would be crying, and if there's anything to really instill a fear of that, it's definitely being a child in a dole office for
Yeah.
much longer than you should be. But you can get out and just keep writing and keep getting better at it. Don't
Mm.
publish too soon. Be hungry and stay hungry. And I think you will get out for sure, and you'll build your career.
I love that so much. I have absolutely loved chatting to you, Carolyn, and I absolutely loved your book. Before I say
Thank you.
goodbye to you, though, I have to get a recommendation from you. So, what would you like to recommend to the listeners?
Oh, so I'm currently reading as well on Audible, Starling House. Is it Alex Harrow, isn't it?
I
But
think I've
I,
heard of this.
yeah, by Alex E. Harrow. And I also loved, there's, I guess, two books if that's not too cheeky.
No, go for it. Love it.
There's a non-fiction work by Philippa Gregory called Normal Women. It's amazing, absolutely incredible book. And also Poet, Mystic, Widow, Wife by Hedda House. It looks at four medieval women that we need to know more about, and it's just brilliant. So
Those are great recommendations. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy chatting to you, Carolyn. Thank you so much.
thanks,
And
Hannah.
yeah, and for our listeners, please go and grab your copy of the Book of Witching. It is an incredible book, and it's definitely in my top reads of the year. And where can they find you on social media, I should ask?
So I'm on Instagram as CJ Cook under slash, no, not under slash, underscore author. And I'm also on Twitter still, or X, whatever you want to call it, C Jess Cook. And I've got a Facebook account as well, and a website, which is
Wonderful.
carolinjesscook.com.
I will link all of those below. I will also put a link in to grab yourselves a copy of the book. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. But that is all we've got time for. So thank you so much again, Caroline, and thank you,
Thank
listeners,
you.
for listening. Bye.